Hey everyone! Super cool opportunity. Aiden and I got to interview Frank Cifaldi and Phil Salvador from the Video Game History Foundation. We reviewed the review of Super Mario Brothers, as in one, as in for the Nintendo Entertainment System, in Computer Entertainer magazine, which the Video Game History Foundation recently acquired the whole complete rights to free and clear and made it available to everyone. You're going to get all the details on that, how they got the rights, how they pursued it, and how they've made it available to everyone who's interested in video game history and interested in video game magazine history, the way Aiden and I are. We've been trying to get Frank and Phil on for since like before we started this podcast, because they're two amazing guys working for an amazing organization they founded and doing amazing work that makes the work that Aiden and I do possible. So please enjoy this teaser. If you're not a FunFactor Ultra Review Crew subscriber, if you would like to hear the rest of it, and I know you would, if you would like to hear our review of Computer Entertainer's contemporary review of Super Mario Brothers, well, just go to funfactorpod.com and subscribe. I promise you cannot miss the sign up widget, as I always say. Please, again, enjoy this conversation. Go to funfactorpod.com for the rest. Gentlemen, we invited you on the show today because the Video Game History Foundation made an exciting recent announcement. You acquired the rights to Computer Entertainer magazine?
This was founded by sisters Mary Lou Bedeau and Celeste Dolan, and ran from 1982 to 1990. This newsletter, fanzine, early magazine was one of the few American publications covering the home gaming scene and game consoles during some of the industry's most historic years. In the announcement post for the acquisition, you wrote, quote, "As a result, Computer Entertainer is one of the only sources for American reviews of classic games like The Legend of Zelda, Final Fantasy, and Super Mario Brothers. And because it was run by a game retailer, this magazine is one of the only reliable sources of American game release dates during this period." So, why did the foundation, Video Game History Foundation, choose to pursue Computer Entertainer specifically, and how did the deal come together?
Well, I think I'll jump in here because there's a little bit of backstory that makes this make more sense. I've been someone who studies history, video game history specifically, for a very long time now, and what I identified really early on was that magazines were the meatiest source for me. I started collecting magazines in the very early 2000s. In fact, the foundation in a lot of ways kind of started as, my personal research library as a journalist and historian who was frustrated that such a thing didn't exist and I had to build it in my house. And it was back in maybe 2011 or so. I'll say the website specifically. So there was a zine that ran in the 90s, early 2000s called Digital Press, which is now a store in New Jersey, a retro game store. But digitalpress.com had a magazine scans section, mostly by a scanner named Scott Stilfen, who he scanned a lot of really kind of obscure 80s stuff. And as I'm sort of building my own library and looking at what was happening in the 80s, I'm kind of relying on people who are more well-versed in that stuff, like Scott. And in that magazine section, there was a category for Computer Entertainer, or perhaps the Video Game Update, its original name. I don't remember, where it was at that time. And there was exactly one issue scanned. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. What is this? Is this like a small newsletter sort of thing? There was reference elsewhere online about how long it ran. But there were no other scans other than just one lone issue from an 8-year run. So I'm looking at the scan, and something I've learned to do very early in my career is just look for a name of a person and start stalking and see where you can go. And this is not a magazine with a masthead. There's no staff role. You don't know from looking at it who made it. But this happened to be a fairly rare occurrence where there was a photo that included one of the editors with a caption with her name, and it was, computer entertainer editor Celeste Badeau, blah 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 blah. And I was like, okay, I got a name. I found her. She's in Australia now, and I messaged her asking if she had any left, and she's like, no, I threw them all away. But I do have my personal bound volumes. I'd be happy to send them to you. And again, this was like 2011, 2012. So we got those. I got those, I should say. There wasn't a foundation yet. And I arranged to get them scanned with a book scanner, which is, kind of two cameras pointed at pages trying to like correct the skew and stuff like that. And long story short, like we put out a like serviceable scan of her volumes on the Internet Archive, and that kind of spread around, the historian community as a good resource. And in terms of like, in terms of fast forwarding to today and like, why did we acquire it and rescan it and all that? This, it's not a happy story, but the story is that Mary Lou's sister, the co-editor of the magazine Celeste, who you mentioned earlier, Celeste passed this year. And Mary Lou was cleaning out her home, and she found that Celeste also had her bound volumes, the identical set. They both had a set, and she emailed me because we had just recently interviewed her for our podcast, the Video Game History Hour. So, we were still kind of fresh in her mind. She emailed me and said, hey, I found Celeste's books. Do you want those too? And I said, yes, but I also, I saw an opportunity there where it's like, well, we didn't properly scan the volumes because we only had one. If we have an identical set, it's not going to completely shatter my heart to cut the pages out and scan them properly. And then as I continued thinking it through, I just had the thought like, well, Mary Lou might be, the sole copyright holder of this material at this point. So, I thought there might be I didn't know what the opportunity was, but I was like, maybe there's an opportunity there to make a video game magazine free. And so I asked her, and we worked it out and acquired it. And I think because we own it, that gave me the excuse to not only, do the labor of making digital editions of the magazine, but also gave me an excuse to go out and travel to the one person that I know of that kept his subscription copies. Leonard Herman, who's a video game Leonard Herman, who's a video game historian. He wrote Phoenix, which is like the first video game book. He had the last, I think, 7 issues that just never made it to a bound set because that year never concluded. So we were able to not acquire, but we went and scanned the last few issues, and finally had the first intact set, had them all cleaned up, had them sorted. I had to manually edit very extensively the first 3 issues because all they had were like bad photocopies of them. And yeah, we just saw it as an opportunity to do something different, and that's what we did.
One of the things that like stands out to me is you have recently launched like a digital library, which makes available a lot of old issues of magazines. What are the benefits of owning and acquiring a magazine like this versus just having it in your collections?
Well, I think what's really exciting about it is, the things we have in our digital library we make available through fair use for research purposes. But when we own the magazine, it's not just that it makes it easier for us to share it, it's that we can then authorize other people to do things with it. When we get donations from developers about development material or things like that, we often have them sign a deed of gift that says something to the effect of like, to the extent that you have rights to this, you allow us to allow other people to reproduce this in their research. So if there's like a book that's going to be using something we have in, like, we have the collection of materials from Cyan. It's all the videos from the making of the Mist series, which is really cool.
Wow.
We can allow people to use that in their documentaries, which is great. And that actually is happening right now, too. There's a documentary about the Mist series that's using footage from our library. This is a case where we can just say, hey, we have the rights to this. You can blanket do whatever you want with this. We put the whole thing into the Creative Commons for free, as long as you give attribution to VHGF. you can use this in anything you want, including commercial projects, which is already happening, which is really cool. And it was a case where, we first thought like, okay, maybe there's like a non-commercial license for research. And then it was like, you know what, this is easier. This is the right thing to do. It's like, if we just put it out for anyone to do something with, not only does that kind of selfishly make our lives easier because we don't have to manually approve requests, but it's like, no, we have the power to just let anyone use this. So why not? And, I think sometimes about, when I tell people I work for a nonprofit and they ask me like, oh, how are you monetizing things? How are you going to license your material? And it's like, we're literally a charity. This is the goal, is we want to help with, a friend of ours in academia referred to this as knowledge production. And I really like that, where it's like, our product is we give you resources you then use to generate interpretation of information and knowledge and understanding. And I think that's having the rights to something. It's not just, it's not just putting up a scan for a magazine. It's, this belongs to everyone now. You can create what you want with it. I think that's really powerful and really unique and unusual in this space, I think, to happen, because, and you were joking earlier about buying Nintendo Power. That's not happening anytime soon. This is kind of a rare opportunity. This is one of the few magazines that was not bought up by one of the, big four or whatever remaining giant publishing companies.
And I just want to add to that a little. This might be, I don't know if this is too inside baseball to talk about like running a small business, because
no such thing.
Even though it's a charity, it is a business, right? Like I have to pay us, right? Like we have to be able to eat. And what Phil was saying about, well, how are you going to monetize this? How are you going to make money off this? Something that I've learned. I've never had to run a business before. This is my first one, and something that I've learned over the years is that if you spend a lot of time and resources generating revenue on things that are fairly low yield, like if we charge for access for Computer Entertainer, and like I don't know, we're gonna make like $2,000 or something. You know what I mean? Like you just have to learn to do the math and be like, this isn't worth it versus like the goodwill that comes out of just putting it out.
I was gonna say there's definitely a evil like Embracer Group version of this where you walk into your friend Norman's house and go, yeah, these 7 issues are technically mine now. Get a lawyer about it.
When you go to the Ferengi archives, I wonder what their preservation system is like on Ferenginar. But I think it is also, in addition to what Frank said, it aligns with our values. I mean, I think, it is a case where it's like, what we want to do is we want to make video game history better as a field. We like to say that the library is a tool that makes people better video game historians. And like, what better way to contribute to that than to create something that is now free information, free knowledge that's out there. So,
yeah. I don't talk about this very much, but my day job is actually with a museum, a large museum. And I work in digital, and like personally for me, like a core tenet of what I want to do is using digital tools to make history accessible for people, because museums have existed for a long time, but often you've had to go to them. You've had to come to the museum to access archives and collections, and we do a lot of work making sure that that's no longer the case. And I think that there's a lot of tension right now about like, I'm sure you guys deal with it, but like AI crawlers coming into like collections and archives websites and databases, using up resources and finding that path forward of saying, we have these materials, we want to make them accessible, we don't want them to be used in bad faith by people who are going to try to make money off of them in whatever way. And I think that your approach of saying, hey, let's put this in the Creative Commons because then everyone can use it, and that tension sort of goes away in a way that I think draws just a lot of positive attention to the work that you're doing and the work that the people on this magazine and old magazines like that do.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we can't do that with everything, of course. I mentioned the Cyan stuff. That's owned by Cyan. They gave us permission to share, but we don't own it. So this is a case where it's like, hey, we can do this. Yeah. So let's do it.
And I will say, I guess it's just a frame of mind I'm in. Is I'm interested in discussing how we survive as a business. That like I can imagine a scenario, a donation of copyright or something where we don't open it up to the Creative Commons, and it's not that we wouldn't allow access to it and fair use for research, etc. But for example, if we had like footage that like documentarians would maybe want to license for their documentaries, you know, we might have a different license in that case because it might actually be a revenue opportunity. But I don't think that Computer Entertainer is, to be frank. Like, I just don't think that that the nickel and diming stuff like this is worth it versus something where it's like, oh, maybe a well-funded movie might make sense to actually pay us for our labor.
You thought we were talking about magazines in this podcast. Joke's on you, we're talking about nonprofit fundraising. Gotcha.
Well, I'm very familiar with that as well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. My wife's day job is in the nonprofit sphere, and we've both done, we're both in political organizing. I'm the partnerships chair for Rank My Vote, which is the ranked choice voting ballot initiative here in Michigan. We're going to amend the Constitution, gathering signatures in the field right now. So like this is all the time for me. Totally comfortable with
it. Games media, like especially through the 90s when Computer Entertainer was predominantly, I guess.
No, it ended in 90.
Ended in 90, but still.
That's crazy. Yeah, that is what makes it interesting, is it was so early. There's like a reputation for games media to be dominated by young men, especially back sort of in the 80s and 90s. So it was especially interesting when you made this announcement. I wasn't familiar with Computer Entertainer because I was like 4 when it was being published.
Well, and also I'm pretty sure it had a very low circulation. I mean, it wasn't a newsstand magazine. It was mail order only. You know, it was an extension of a mail order company. And the only people that I've ever known that even knew about it have had some affiliation with the industry. And you know, they would, I mean, we actually have, just by coincidence, we recently acquired something that demonstrated to us that they were exhibiting at Consumer Electronics Show in '85 and like handing out a free issue, you know, to get people to sign up. So it's something where it was just very low print run and is sort of a like, you know, for people in the know kind of thing and not a typical newsstand magazine.
Right. Sort of that's, it's almost like Worldcon is on right now. It's a big science fiction fantasy convention that used to be very like sort of like niche, like the like, you know, kind of core group of writers and fans were there, but now it's expanded into something much larger. One thing that stood out to me about Computer Entertainer was that it was founded by 2 women. You've talked a lot about Mary Lou and her sister Celeste, but what do you think that their legacy means for games media as like a diverse space nowadays?
I think what's really exciting about it, and this is kind of counterintuitive, is that it's not super exceptional or exciting. You know, I think if we look back at, again, it is, the space of games media does have that very, you know, like male skewing angle, especially once the industry revved back up when the NES came in. But I think what's really notable is that even though this was run by 2 women, it wasn't pigeonholed as like a publication by or for women. Like if you look at a lot of those magazines or publications or communities, they'll often have like, you know, the women writer. It's like she's not like other girls or something like that. It's like, no, they just were 2 of the most prolific video game journalists of the era, and they were women. I think it's notable because when we look back at a lot of you know, some sort of the early diversity in the video game industry, we often look for, you know, the sort of like essentialist, like, oh, what are they doing that's unique to their, you know, their particular gender or race? Like, you know, I think about, this is going a bit further afield, but I think this is worth talking about. You know, an example like Muriel Tramis, who made games in France about, you know, her about the French Caribbean and the history there, and they're very much about race and gender in ways that are palpable and exciting. And I think Muriel Tramis is a really important milestone in, you know, Black game development. But I also think about, we just got a collection in that touches on Stan Thomas, which is someone who I think people don't know. He was the president of Sega Channel. And he was a Black game executive, and that had, you know, his work did not have anything to do with his identity. He was just the president of Sega Channel, but he is also a really important Black pioneer in video games. Yeah. So when we talk about Mary Lou and Celeste, I think it's exciting that they were here this early in the industry. They were again very prolific journalists, but it wasn't like, here's the women journalists. You know, I put him in conversation with someone like Joyce Worley, who was one of the first women game journalists, where they just were good at their jobs and effective and were women. And I think that's exceptionally notable considering how hard the pendulum swung back the other way once we got the, you know, oh, hey, we can sell video games to young boys who want to blow things up, once the industry started kicking back in the United States.
Yeah, that's kind of what came to mind for me too, is that there was a pendulum swing. And if we're talking about the early 80s where Computer Entertainer, I should say the video game update, spawned out of, it does look to me to be slightly more gender diverse than it became in the 90s. Phil mentioned Joyce Worley, who was one of the three main editors at Electronic Games, the first sort of newsstand glossy console video game magazine. That's 1/3 of the editorial staff was female. I think about things like the early programmers at like Atari and Activision and even like Mattel Electronics for the Intellivision. If you go through and look at the staff, it's it can be surprising how many games were just straight up written by women. And I don't know if something quote unquote happened, but I do know that that wasn't necessarily the case, kind of starting in the 90s, but yeah, to Phil's point, I think what's interesting is that it's kind of not interesting.
Yeah, when you see like the blooper videos and the credits of the Tony Hawk games, and it's like all the like guys in their 20s skateboarding through walls of Mountain Dew or whatever they do in the offices at Neversoft at 2 a.m. while they're all crunching. It's like that's not the natural state of video games. Like, right. No, there had been a diverse, especially in media, like there have been a lot more around that. So it's great to have another example of that. It's like, no, women have always been part of the video game industry. There's always been diversity. It's not something that we're like, I don't even want to entertain arguments about like forced diversity or whatever, but it's like, no, it's always been there. What are you talking about?
That's something we've actually been finding too, even looking at we're starting with 1995 through 1997, sort of the transition from 16 to 32-bit. And like the very first issue of Game Players we looked at, which was like peak juvenilia, right? For guys. And, pen pal section, half the names are, what would be considered girls' names, right? Like you see there's like the next issue we saw this like Blockbuster World Championship, and it's like, it was like 30% girls and pretty ethnically diverse also. And, and it's like, it's the forced non-diversity. The non-diversity is the forcedness, right? Like that's where like people doing this false history of how things always were later down the road, or say, hey, no, this is a boys club, stay out. I think that we're finding that again and again.
They invented gender to sell video games. It's really